my name is Ryan Cam, and welcome back to the 1999 Project. This week's theme is hidden gems because as we close out the month of August, or we'll come close to closing out the month of August, it seems like the summer movie season for at least this project is coming to an end, and it's been a busy summer to say the least. But that doesn't mean that there has been a lack of quality because there have been some pretty good ones to come out near the end of August. It's a busy episode, so let's jump in. Starting off with a genuine hidden gem, especially considering the talent involved in front of the camera and behind the camera. It's a little movie called Teaching Mrs. Tingle.
This year, they're going to give her a lesson. Teaching Mrs. Tingle.
Teaching Mrs. Tingle was directed by Kevin Williamson, and it starred Katie Holmes, Helen Mirren, Michael McKean, and Jeffrey Tambor, among others. It tells the story of a young girl named Leanne Watson, played by Holmes, who is desperately trying to get to valedictorian status at her school. She is graduating high school and trying to get on to college. However, she has to and ultimately fails to get past Mrs. Tingle, played by Helen Mirren, the teacher from hell. There is a misunderstanding in which Mrs. Tingle believes that Watson is cheating, and so Watson, along with two friends, accidentally kidnap her. And there's a lot that happens before then as well. But to talk about this movie with me is the definitive expert on Kevin Williamson, because Kevin Williamson has pretty much written every Scream movie. So here is my tag partner in the Why We Love Horror Trivia League and many other trivia leagues, Eric Moreno. Eric, how you doing?
I'm doing pretty good. I wouldn't consider myself a Kevin Williamson expert, but I'm here to discuss about it because I think everything interesting about this movie is related to that fact, to the work he has done in the teenage comedy, especially. And I was very happy to be invited to talk about this movie, the one and only, at least until Scream 7 comes out, a movie directed by the famous iconic horror writer and teen writer.
One of the things that stuck out to me was that, and I'm sure you'll talk more research about this as we go on, but this was originally supposed to come out earlier in the year. It was supposed to be called Killing Mrs. Tingle. However, unfortunately, a little thing called Columbine happened, and so the movie got delayed, re-edited. It was supposed to be rated R, and it turned out to be PG-13. And instead of being called Killing Mrs. Tingle, it was renamed to Teaching Mrs. Tingle. I'd say, grand scheme of things, this was probably for the best that they did that because, I mean, considering the main characters are high schoolers, there's a lot to unpack there. So delaying and moving and re-editing everything in the grand scheme of things was the wise thing to do. But this movie feels very much like a hidden gem. This movie feels very much like a Scream movie, but without Ghostface and without any of the satire, I guess.
I kind of disagree a little bit. I think you can tell. I didn't know the fact before watching the movie, but I think you can tell the movie did suffer a little bit by the. To me, the biggest fault of the movie, to give it an overall thought before going into the minutia of it, I think it lacks a little bit of edge, and it's understandable. Like it was definitely released at a very terrible time to release teen movies, especially ones that were attempting to give it a little more the violence and suspense. And I think the movie does sell itself at the very least in the genre description when you go into IMDb or the description. It's both a black comedy and a suspense movie, and I think the suspense is lacking because the edge is actually not there, at least to me, in comparison to many other movies released at the same time with the same type of character, like precocious teenagers trying to getting into trouble with the adults in very violent or suspenseful ways. And I think it's very understandable that they have to do that's actually something that affected the follow-up Scream movie that came out after Teaching Mrs. Tingle, which was Scream 3, which was not written by Kevin Williamson overall, although a sample of his first how to say it, his first draft was used, but it's overall not overall written by him. That Scream 3 was also like impacted by the Columbine High School shootings. Apparently, the original twist for Scream 3 was that Stu Macher's Matthew Lillard's character from Scream was going to come back, leading a pack of vengeful teenagers that were going to shoot up, and killer teenagers were not in vogue in 1999, at least not they weren't supposed to, but it happened.
Talk about in a different world, how strange that a twist that would have been and how that would have gone over. But unfortunately, we will never know. But as far as teaching Mrs. Tingle goes, I feel like this is one that is far from perfect, but I feel like I'll disagree with you slightly. I think there is some actually good tension throughout it. The movie's strength for me was how unstable it made you feel because it's both a blessing and a curse for the movie that you really don't know who to root for because Mrs. Tingle is no saint, but really the main characters aren't saints either. I think as close as you can get is Leanne Watson, but even then she kind of like gives in to her darker urges, let's just say. So I feel like it's a little tough to be like, who's the good guy in this situation? Because they kidnap Mrs. Tingle, but Mrs. Tingle, like, legitimately wants these kids to fail. So it's like, who is like who do you root for here, I suppose?
I mean, I do agree with the fact that the characters are not fully like you're not super meant to root for the lead teenagers. Although I probably disagree that to me the thing that it's mostly because I've seen a lot of similar movies where these type of characters are shown, like especially in regards to Kevin Williamson's work, like the lead character is also a brunette with who is goody two shoes in comparison to her friends, and this is something that it's a staple of the teen satire where they get into trouble with these types of things. Let's go back to Heather's in 10 years before Teaching Miss Tingles, which I have a whole deal where Heather's kind of inspired writers like Kevin Williamson and Joss Whedon, but that's a whole other conversation for a much longer video, probably come up later. But this type of character, actually, the character in Teaching Miss Tingle for me, it kind of lacks that edge because she is not as proactive as the other two characters, and I think they do make a lot of effort in making you at the very least understand why she's doing it. That the other two characters are mostly along for the ride. She's very relatable in regards to her situation with her mom, and she wants to get out of town. And I do agree that the best use of the suspense is every time we see Helen Mirren in the scene, because she is actually a pretty good actress in this movie. She shows up her skills, and the most like impactful and most unique, even if it's not super unique because it's kind of Hannibal Lecter stuff, but the way she manipulates the other characters is the most interesting stuff, which is kind of interesting. Like everything else around the movie is not super risque, but that kind of manipulation is kind of interesting from an adult to a teenager.
Helen Mirren shines like a diamond in this, and most of the movie is just her tied to a bed, like basically like Carla Gugino in Gerald's Game. And so it's really up to her to like move everything along. And it's Helen Mirren, so of course she crushes it, and she does. It's funny to think like she would like win an Oscar for being Queen Elizabeth and be known for these more dignified roles, and yet here she is playing like a faux dignified role, like almost as this teacher who never quite made it out of the town, out of this very small fictional town of Grandsboro, California. That's kind of why I feel like this is like a Scream movie without Ghostface, because it feels very much like if Ghostface were running around, this would almost feel like Scream 3, but that could be another discussion for another time. Like, you don't know where she's coming from. Like, there are scenes where you think she's genuine, but then she's like, "Oh, psych, I was just screwing with you," and is like that instability.
No, I think she definitely is the strongest part of the movie. I think she gets the best dialogue. Like I think the issue for me, it's mostly like it kind of feels low stakes, even if there's I think that's why you can tell it was kind of edited for the time it was released. Like I think the title in itself as a marketing tool, like it's very known to be a box office bomb, even if it had the backup of Kevin Williamson's career. But that point, like that Dawson's Creek and the Scream movies had, oh, this is Kevin Williamson, and this kind of, and it's not to blame him because the script itself was written before he released Scream and Dawson's Creek, so it was actually a previous project with him. He was trying to pull off. for a while until he got his directorial debut. But I think there's especially there's some scenes like when they are attempting to frame her and I'm forgetting the name of the boy, but the boy who's helping the girls. Like they are maybe hinting that they are going to frame her for sleeping with a teen, for with a student, and they don't overall they don't do that. And I think a similar movie to that was released that year, Cruel Intentions, even if it's lower stakes in the sense that there's no murder. Well, there's murder, but that's a spoiler for Cruel Intentions, I guess. A 25-year-old movie. It feels much more risque in the sense that the things that these teenagers are doing are much worse, and they are not as worse as kidnapping, but if they feel more suspenseful, at least to me, similar to other movies like, I mean, Scream. The killers are teenagers. Spoilers for Scream, I guess. It does feel more dangerous. Drop Dead Gorgeous also has killer teenagers. Was released the same year. I'm not familiar with the exact release year, the release date of Drop Dead Gorgeous, but it wasn't affected, I guess, by the Columbine stuff. Election, which has nowhere near as killer themes, that also released that year, feels more risque because of the situations that are involving the adult characters and teenagers. You have to see Election to check that out if you haven't. Uh, and there's something, especially Jawbreaker, also a movie very compared to Heathers and Mean Girls, and to a lesser extent Scream, because Rose McGowan is there. Feels much more risque than Teaching Miss Tingle, which seems to be, at least to me, seems to be trapped between trying to be more risque and having to sanitize itself because of the stuff that happened that year. That's one of the movies that had to be reworked, and to me it seems to work. It doesn't seem to go all the way into black comedy that at least I was expecting to be a bit more dark.
Yeah, I will agree with you in that in saying that I have seen Jawbreaker and Drop Dead Gorgeous. I think Drop Dead Gorgeous is highly underrated. I actually covered it for the 99 Project earlier this year. It's quite good indeed. It's basically a Christopher Guest movie, but Christopher Guest had nothing to do with it. I wanted to know more about actually like about Mrs. Tingle. It's implied that she had like a kid and like the kid left. Like, I don't know, Eric, did you catch that? Or did I just, is that a false memory? Did she mention she had a child somewhere along the way?
I think she mentions that as a way to manipulate Katie Holmes' character. As far as I remember, she does mention she was married and she was left behind. Although there's a very particular scene where I remember that there's hints at more with her character, because I remember her starting to read the Salem witch trial diary and actually being affected by the words. Like she made a conscious decision to be a mean. She's not a caricature as some will expect of this type of character. And I think you can take with a grain of salt whatever she says against to manipulate the other characters. But there's something in the performance of Helen Mirren that hints at something more, which probably should be developed more. Like the movie itself doesn't feel like, could be a bit shorter, but if it had to be longer, it probably could have developed her character, because she's the best part of the movie.
For sure. The movie in like it kind of there's some parts of the logic of the movie that just kind of feel like, okay, that would make no sense. Like how the other girl, like the other friend who happens to be a girl who's like so good at doing Mrs. Tingle's voice that she like gets like she convinces Molly Ringwald's character that she's out sick, which by the way, that was a nice get in getting Molly Ringwald as the secretary. I did not expect to see her. I'm like, is that? And then I Googled it and I'm like, yep, that's Molly Ringwald, all right. So that was a nice get there. And then like Jeffrey Tambor being so enamored with Mrs. Tingle to be like, her voice sounds odd. Like, I don't understand.
Yeah, I think also a very short appearance by BBK Fox. I think she was good in the one scene she was. I thought she was going to be a little bit more in the movie. I think I agree with you. Molly Ringwald was a nice get. Like it's a good reference to the teen movies of the '80s. Like, oh yeah, now she's an adult and she's playing she's like a secretary, fills up for Mrs. Tingle a little bit in the class. Like Jeffrey Tambor, like I mean, his legacy hasn't aged super well. I'm not going to go into it that much, but at the time, a very good character actor to have.
Also, the movie doesn't, also, the movie treats crossbows very weirdly. Like, somehow a school notebook can stop a bolt from a crossbow. Okay. Like I've watched enough Deadliest Warrior in my life to look at that and go, yeah, that would never fly. Like seriously, like the crossbow is the main weapon in this, and I'm just sitting there like, first of all, that would never be let in the door of a high school nowadays. That he loads the thing and fires it in the classroom, and is like, now you sit down before I have you arrested. I'm like, you'd be arrested on the spot, my dude. Like, what are you doing?
I was gonna say a lot of it it was something that I grabbed a hold of during the Heather's special features. That there's a very different landscape in the teenage comedy or in the way teenage violence was depicted before Columbine and after. Like this is something that was definitely a throwback to before that happened, and that probably something that remained in the movie before they thought about it. Oh yeah, we got a weapon inside the school, and it wasn't treated as something dangerous. That's kind of interesting, and the fact that it was written before that but released after. So I don't know how much it affected. I don't think it was the movie's daring or controversial enough in that sense. I don't think anybody's complaining about the violence in the movie, but it's something that is a little bit of a throwback before, because bringing a weapon to the school is probably something more dangerous after 99 that before 99. And to be the movie is stuck in limbo between those timelines, it's kind of interesting. For a lot of teaching Mrs. Tingle's interesting part is interesting stuff is the way it's the bridge between those types of movies, I would say, because he was the one that was actually affected by it. It's not one that like thankfully you had seen Drop Dead Gorgeous before, but that's totally a movie released before the Columbine stuff, because there's a lot of I mean, no, there's not a lot, but there's killing in that movie. Spoilers, I guess, I guess, but that is
Yeah.
in the title. And
Make the
then the
long
movies
story
after.
short. Make the long story short, Drop Dead Gorgeous is dark. Like it's dark, dark, dark. Like I said in my review at the time. Like that movie, I'm just like, wow, they allowed this. That's crazy.
Yeah, they went there, and that's probably why this particular movie, Teaching Miss Tingle, doesn't fully work. Is because I've seen much funnier movies, I've seen much darker movies in the same genre, even in the same year, and I expected more of Kevin Williamson, especially as a big Scream fan. Like there's something to be said that's maybe this is not totally the fault of him. Like I think he's a solid director visually. I think he managed some interesting stuff. Like he gets some subtle stuff when he's developing the character of Katie Holmes, and he knows when to keep the camera on Helen Mirren, which is always a plus. Like this is when you show her reaction. Like I think he got some really solid stuff out of the directors he had worked before, especially with Scream. And I would say that's why it kind of is reminiscent of Scream in that way. I think it's mostly the fault of the landscape it was released, and some of the stuff had to be cut out. Like I would be very like, even if I didn't love the movie itself, I will be really interested in seeing the original cut of the movie, Killing Mrs. Tingle. I also think that the title itself doesn't sell me in the type of movie it actually is. That's why I think it bombed at the time. It had some decent awards like Saturn and MTV's. Like it had some push out of the marketing, I would say, but also August. It's very interesting you mentioned like the in this particular 1999 project. Like August is not always a big month for big releases. Like you always find hidden gems and that stuff. Here and there you get a Blair Witch or a Sixth Sense, which were great and super successful movies. But most August, you can see it. It's the same in '99 and 2024. August is not the year. It's not the month where you release the big movies. It makes sense why it didn't succeed. The people were already in school and all that.
Exactly. Like doing this project has made me like realize that people like it was so much better back then. I'm like, I mean, sure you can make that argument, but in terms of quality and in terms of like how movies are done, like it's not so different. I mean, the technology may have changed, the faces may have changed, but in terms of like how things are done, it's like it's like stepping outside of, but staying very close to the box, if that's a good example. But to close out talking about Teaching Mrs. Tingle, I'm going to give this a high good rating. This movie's not perfect, but I feel like it was cut off at the knees because of very real world events. And that was not the fault of Kevin Williamson or anyone else involved. Come on, Kino Lorber, I need to see the original cut of Killing Mrs. Tingle. I mean, you've released more obscure stuff. The ball's in your court. That's all I'm saying. Simply put, the movie's on Hoopla Digital. I recommend you all at least give it a chance if you are even halfway interested, especially if you're like into Kevin Williamson, because I feel like it's a real interesting time capsule in like seeing what he was up to because he had done Scream 1 and 2, and then it was like immediately like and then it was this. And then he would do Dawson's Creek and would do Scream 3 and he would continue on there. I'm interested to see what he'll do with Scream 7 because that's going to be his first directorial effort in over a quarter century. So it's going to be very interesting to see how he does with that.
Yeah, that should be interesting. Like he's mostly been relegated to TV stuff after that. Like Dawson's Creek ended like in 2003. I'm pretty sure. And he started with the Vampire Diaries, which lasted a while. And he has worked in the movie here or there, and he didn't fully. I'm pretty sure he didn't write for Scream 5 and 6. So he hasn't come back fully to the franchise. I would guess he's involved. Like it really it's a shame what happens to Scream 7. It's going to be fully on the producer's fault in that case if it's not as interesting for the especially the amount of people that were super involved with the storyline that 5 and 6 were developing. So it probably shouldn't be on the camp of Kevin Williamson to be if it happens that it's not a great movie because it had to be changed because of the release and what happened behind the scenes and all that. It's going to be a very similar issue to this movie in particular, the Teaching Miss Tingle. Like the two times he has stepped to the director's seat, like he has been struggling with producers and behind the scenes stuff and other things. Like that's a shame to be a writer, an accomplished writer, trying to be a director and having to deal with the Columbine stuff in this in '99 and whenever Scream 7 releases with the backstage controversy and all that.
Yeah, but what did you all think of teaching Mrs. Tingle? Let us know in the comments. Eric, thank you so much for joining me. I always love discussing movies with you. I had a great time to have you on. Shoot, I forget what I had you on for last. That's really awkward.
Blair Witch.
That's the one, yes. But that was a great discussion, and I hope to have you back on very soon. Your channel is at Spoilord. It is a
Yep.
Spanish language channel, I should say that now, but what I could understand, I did enjoy. So go give them a subscribe there. And of course, we're in the Why We Love Horror Trivia League. We are the champions of that league, of the tag team division. I don't know when our next defense is. John's making us wait on that one, but Eric's got a Just the Clips championship defense coming up at the start of the new month, so be on the lookout for all of that. But Eric, thank you for joining me.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's always a pleasure.
But as far as this video goes, I've got a couple more movies left to talk about, so we carry on by talking about a severely underrated biopic from the fine folks at HBO called Introducing Dorothy Dandridge.
Halle Berry stars in the remarkable true story, Introducing Dorothy Dandridge.
Introducing Dorothy Dandridge was directed by Martha Coolidge, the woman who directed Out to Sea, among other things, and this was created by HBO. It starred Halle Berry and Brent Spiner, among others, and this is the biopic on Dorothy Dandridge, the first African-American actress to be nominated for Best Actress at the Academy Awards. There is much more to her than that. So much more. I went into this movie totally blind, not knowing who Dorothy Dandridge was, and I wanted to know everything about her as soon as the movie ended. I don't know if this movie is my favorite biopic I've ever seen, but I would say it's one of them. It's one of the more underrated ones. First of all, from Halle Berry, she is awesome in this movie. She ended up winning a Primetime Emmy and a Golden Globe for this role, deservedly so because she crushed it. Dorothy Dandridge, if I could best describe her life and career, is very tragic. Here are some of the cliff notes. She gets married to this one dude named Harold Williams of the Williams brothers, a rather a rather famous African American brother group in that group of brothers who sang back then, for lack of a better term. They get married and they have a kid. However, when the kid is born, he's off playing golf and completely misses the birth. And his absence plays a part in Dorothy Dandridge's daughter basically suffering from permanent brain damage to the point where later on in life, Dorothy had to surrender custody of her and of her daughter and place her daughter in the Camarillo State Mental Hospital in California. Oh, believe me, it gets worse. Dandridge then gets remarried to this white man who is just horrible to her. She had a fling with the director Otto Preminger, who thought she was treating him well and vice versa, but she was just kind of a front and basically hated her because at a certain point, like he was just using her. That was brutal. She gets embezzled out of all of her money, and that's all happening while all of the racism of the late 40s up to the early 60s was going down. She was a trailblazer. She performed in all of these clubs for the first time as the first African American singer slash actor slash performer, but she had to deal with ignorance and a whole lot of it. And Halle Berry shines like a diamond in this. The year after this, she would go on to be Storm in the first X-Men movie, but here, she absolutely shows her acting chops in this, and Dorothy Dandridge just comes across as just someone who deserved so much more but got so little. It really is a tragic story. I want to be careful in not saying that I want a remake of this, but someone needs to make a movie on Dorothy Dandridge. There's not like there's a lack of material there, rather unfortunately. In terms of other actors, you got Brent Spiner, who would play her longtime manager, and pretty much the only person who treated her half decently outside of her mother and her sisters. Brent Spiner is awesome in this movie. He has a couple scenes where, like, you forget he was ever Data. Like, the dude just does such a good job at being basically Dorothy Dandridge's biggest ally throughout, like, hell or high water and all of that. He crushes it. When Dorothy Dandridge loses everything, guess who's there to pick up the pieces? Brent Spiner. Have somebody in your life who is exactly like Brent Spiner in this movie. Honestly, this movie gets an amazing grade. I don't really recommend this in terms of watchability. I recommend it in terms of importance and just general, like, you need to go see this right now. It's streaming on Max. Do yourself a favor and watch it for yourself. It definitely falls into the biopic, like, trappings here and there, like glossing over rather important events, that being one of the pitfalls of it, but I don't care. This movie spoke to me. It was incredibly well acted, well shot. HBO is the chaotic neutral of the 1999 project. The movies are either really mediocre or really outstanding. And introducing Dorothy Dandridge fits up with the Jack Bull in terms of this is amazing. But from one TV network to another TV network, we're going from HBO to the Fox Family Channel. Yes, really. The movie's called Au Pair.
Gregory Harrison and Heidi Noel Enhart as the Au Pair, a Fox Family original movie.
Au Pair was released on the Fox Family Channel. It starred Gregory Harrison, Heidi Lenhart, and John Rhys-Davies 2 years before he would be in Lord of the Rings. Yes, the John Rhys-Davies you're thinking of. And it tells the story of a young woman who has just graduated from UCLA with an MBA, and she is ready to take on the world. However, the world is not particularly kind. She ends up applying for a job at a very large business firm, but as the nanny to the CEO's two very precocious children. As soon as this movie started, I was saying to myself, this reeks of late 90s cheese, and in some cases it works, but here, I don't know if I'm gonna like this. I can't say that I hate this movie. because that would be inaccurate, but this is a movie that I don't really know how to place because there's definitely annoying parts of it, but there's also some genuinely heartwarming things here, and there really is almost no in between. This is as close to a mixed bag as I have covered in this series recently. I did like the performances, though, for the most part. Heidi Lenhart, who plays the main character Jennifer, I thought she did a good job. John Rhys-Davies' role is not as big as you might want, but when he does show up, he does do good. And Gregory Harrison plays very good as the father of the children. He's not your standard, I gotta deal with these kids. Like, he's not a bad dad. He's just a busy dad. And the movie does a good job of showing that he truly does mean well, but he's just strapped for time. The kids themselves are very hit or miss. About 20 minutes in, when the pranks begin, including putting mice in Jennifer's bed and stacking up dishes in front of her door so that she runs into them and they all go clattering to the floor, I was thinking to myself, I'm not going to like these kids. I just have a feeling. But by the end of the movie, they do mellow out. And really, the idea of like Jennifer and these kids having a genuine bond really makes the movie work, or at least watchable. They do feel very much like Macaulay Culkin from Home Alone clones. They even have a toy RC car mounted with a camera like the kid in Home Alone 3. Not the movie that I would pull for inspiration for a movie like this, but hey, I didn't make the movie, so what am I gonna do? But in the grand scheme, the kids do feel like kids. Like, at a certain point, I was like, I didn't like you before, but you're starting to grow on me. And that's what happened. Parts of this movie that feel very rushed, like the big breakup at the end where like the CEO and the au pair don't like fall in love and get married and all of that. I thought that was where they were going, but they made it very clear that that's not where this movie is headed, and thank God for that. But when she is fired and she is like leaves in a huff, it happened later in the movie than I expected. I checked the runtime. I'm like, this movie has 10 minutes left and we're now just getting to this. Interesting choice. This movie definitely feels cliched at times, but it also flips the script on the cliches at some points. The movie honestly gets a good rating from me. I did not expect to give it this high of a rating. I expected to kind of hate it, but the movie grew on me as I watched it. It's not a perfect movie. It definitely has problems and annoyances. But by the end of the movie, I was sitting there like, it's the Fox Family Channel. Like, what do you want? The movie knows exactly what it is. It doesn't try to be anything more than it is. It's enjoyable. But now let's close things out this week by taking a look at, well, what somebody thought The Wire was supposed to be. It's In Too Deep.
Omar Epps, LL Cool J, In Too Deep.
Nobody will ever get in this far again.
In Too Deep was directed by Michael Weimer, and it starred Omar Epps and LL Cool J and Nia Long. It tells the story of a cop, played by Epps, who is undercover in Cincinnati, Ohio's biggest drug kingpin organization. The organization is led by a man who calls himself God, literally, played by LL Cool J, who rules Cincinnati's drug scene with an iron fist. In typical undercover cop fashion, Omar Epps' character starts out being like, this is just a job, this is just a job. But the deeper he gets, the realizes that he is starting to get a little too involved in this, and he may actually be starting to like it. Like I said in the intro, this movie definitely feels like what somebody thought The Wire was supposed to be. It feels like this movie beat The Wire's premise to it by at least a couple years, because it's about undercover cops, and then it's also about cops working with people within this organization and trying to stop a drug organization. It feels eerily similar in that regard. I don't think the movie's perfect by any means, but there are definitely good moments that are undercut by over-the-top moments. Omar Epps and LL Cool J are both surprisingly good in the movie. Omar Epps teeters on the edge of being unlikable, not his acting, but just his character. At a certain point, I was just like, oh, God, either you're in or you're out. We do not need both. But the movie does a good job of making you feel like he's unsteady and he just doesn't know what to do. It doesn't work all of the time. There are definitely moments where he would definitely have been pulled off the case at least a couple of times, and he actually is. But then he goes around the back of his supervisor and then gets back into the case.
It just raises too many questions.
LL Cool J is good in his role. Nia Long is good in her role. She's not in the movie as much as you think, but she is good. Omar Epps' commanding officer is played by Stanley Tucci. Yes, the Stanley Tucci you're thinking of. And another cop on the force is played by Jackie Brown herself, Pam Grier. Unfortunately, she's not in the movie as much as you would hope, but when she is there, she is good. The movie goes way too over the top at points, to the point of just being cartoonish. I won't go too deep into describing it because it's rather graphic, but there is a scene in which LL Cool J, his character, is interrogating one of his associates who is tied up on a pool table, naked, and, well, takes a pool stick and shoves it up his hole. Yes, I cannot make something like that up. There's another scene where he and Omar Epps' character casually beat up a guy who owes God money and then takes his wife, and God takes out his gun and puts it in her mouth, and I'm pretty sure he imitates doing it, like what some people do with their hands in private, like with the gun. This feels very much like another version of Donnie Brasco, except this is fictional and not based on a true story, crossed over with The Wire. However, I am going to give this a good rating. There's enough enjoyment here to where I can go, that was good. I liked that. But overall, this movie is like it teeters on the edge of being great, but just there are moments where you're just like, yep, you just killed the mood. Like, I'm just sitting there like, who acts like this freely thinking they can get away with it? But I pass it off to all of you. What did you think of any of the movies I talked about? Let me know in the comments. I'd love to read what you have to say. My name is Ryan Cam, and I'll see you in the next one.